Ciao, welcome to Celebrating Culture. This episode features journalist Danielle Romero, who interviewed us on our work regarding the migration of 60,000 Sicilians to Louisiana, their challenges, and their contributions to America. Both Danielle and I have ancestors from Northeast Louisiana. Are you ready?
Do it.
All right. Hey, Danielle, it's great to be on your show. My name is Charles Gino Marsala. I'm from New Orleans. I went out to California and ended up becoming mayor of Atherton, California in 2006. And then I came back to Louisiana, and I'm currently the president of the American Italian Federation of the Southeast. And I decided that I wanted to tell our story. So I have a show on PBS here locally at 9 o'clock called Celebrating Culture. And we've been doing a lot of documentaries about the Italian migration into Louisiana.
It's amazing. Your channel is so professional, and I'm going to send people over there, and I'll link to it. But if you want to see his channel, it's just AWE News at YouTube. But I'll link to it. I'm amazed by how professional. And they only give me some tips because I feel like you just go out there and talk to people, and it looks so easy for you.
And the cameraman, who's actually my production manager, and it really a lot of credit goes to Joey Harmon. He does phenomenal editing. Sound, he does everything, and we've been nominated for 3 Emmys. Yes, Danielle, the success of the show, Celebrating Culture, can be attributed to having great guests with great stories to tell. But we've also received great coaching and help. When Joey and I started working together in 2015, the first project was to bring attention to endangered species such as elephants, rhinos, and lions. Basically, a modern-day version of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, but adding that many species are today endangered in the wild. At that point, Ron Yeager and Jim Dodson of WLAE-TV picked up our show and began coaching us. During one meeting, Jim pointed out that we needed to add drone footage. Shortly after the meeting, I received an email from Steve Sobrato of Bumblebee Productions offering to drone for us. Steve's work is amazing and took our documentaries to a new level. We started droning Louisiana coastal restoration projects, and then we added droning our Louisiana cultural episodes, such as Homer's House and the Great River Road Museum. When I moved on to the Sicilian Immigration Project, Frank Maselli was honorary consul and a director of the American Italian Cultural Center. Frank introduced me to his Italian connections around America. At Frank's Christmas concert in the Italian Piazza, I met band leader and songwriter Alina Prima. She came up with an idea for us to do a variety show called Bonacera, Louisiana, which is also on WLA-TV as well. We've started work on our next series, which is Route 66. Route 66 was founded in 1926 and goes over 2,400 miles from Chicago to Los Angeles. The best way to describe Route 66 is 150 towns, with each one being a pearl, and strung together to make a beautiful necklace.
That's a good
That's great, Dad.
So what was your experience as a kid versus maybe your dad's? Was he also born in New Orleans, or where was he from?
Was born in Monroe.
Yeah.
And, I'm 4th generation here. And oddly enough, there was a little Sicily, a little Italy in Monroe, Louisiana. My dad married an Italian Sicilian girl in Monroe, and then they moved to New Orleans right before I was born. So I went back and forth to Monroe a lot during growing up with St. Joseph Altars, weddings. I have like 300 cousins there. And then in 1960s, they bulldozed Little Italy and made that neighborhood into the Civic Center. So I realized that the Civic Center story the Little Italy story was lost, and that I could tell the story so that my younger cousins would know what our ancestors did. And there's a cemetery there with the cities in Sicily where all of these Italians came from. And it's right in downtown Monroe. It's an amazing little story. And the funny thing was they did win the state basketball title for single A in 1960. There were 10 Italians on the team and 1 non-Italian, but they were called the Fighting Irish.
That's really how I'm surprised that they were going along with it. That's all I'll say. It's amazing. So when I started researching the Louisiana side, I did not expect to run into my dad's family story. Like my dad's side, Southern Italian. My mom's side is Louisiana. And imagine my shock researching and being like, first of all, I grew up with the identity of being Italian American. Never heard of any of this stuff, first of all. But to find it there in Louisiana, and I'm talking about the massacre of, when I want to get to that because you've covered that so much. Did you grow up knowing about the history of the Italian experience in New Orleans? Or how did you even come to find out about that stuff?
I had some friends who would say, "Hey, Charles, who killed a chief?" And as I learned about that, that has kind of faded. You don't hear that much, but I still had a really good friend who would tease me. He went out to LA and got into the movies. But when he would call, he'd go, "Hey, Marsala, who killed a chief?" And it was really meant that we know you Italians did it as an insult to putting you down. And I started, I got fortunate. I met a gentleman named Basil Russo. His sons are the Russo brothers who do the Marvel movies. So I was at the convention and I saw they're starting to do these Italian independent film things. And I said, well, I'm going to do a film about Italians, Louis Prima, and music, and a few other guys I'm working on. Just make me a film about the massacre.
Murder of a police chief in New Orleans, Louisiana, lead to the creation of Columbus Day celebrations.
On March 14th, 1891, 11 Italians were made the victims of a lynch mob on the streets right here in the city of New Orleans. This issue, in my opinion, is called for a formal apology.
Just as there was a committee of 50 that was organized to take out the Italians, there could have been a committee of 7 that was organized to take out the chief of police.
Those who don't know what we're talking about, what is that phrase referring to?
So it's sometimes called the lynching. It happened on March 14th, 1891. We just had the anniversary. The police chief was killed in 1890. The mayor blamed the Italian community. He said the chief had said the word Dagos did it, but the only person that heard him was his bodyguard. And as I looked at this, I think the bodyguard's the guy that killed him. And then later, the bodyguard refused to testify. They got acquitted. The city council had given $10,000 to a committee appointed by the mayor to look into the Italian situation in New Orleans. They used the money to buy Winchester rifles. And when the Italians got acquitted, they broke into the jail and they shot 9 of them and hung 2 of them. And that was the massacre. Then that set off a chain of events where the Italian consul, the ambassador gets recalled, the president steps in, does retributions to the families. He had some discretionary money, and then he creates Columbus Day. So that's this amazing story as we're fighting to keep Columbus Day right now. Few people know that it got started as a way of trying to get the Italians accepted nationally because we're having these problems in Boston, New York, and other cities. And that's the massacre was 1891, and it led to everything we have now.
Yeah, I think the massacre is really shocking to me, in part because it was the largest mob lynching in U.S. history. Not talking about the largest government lynching, but obviously it was like I think 25 indigenous, possibly I think Dakota men. I don't remember exactly. And obviously, African Americans in the South, Black people in the South were getting lynched at a much higher rate. But this was like the largest mass lynching, and it kind of stunned me to think, well, what's the vitriol against Italians? I'm like, Italians are as American as apple pie because I grew up in New York in the 80s, and I didn't know this world, the world that my grandparents existed in. So you find out about this. Tell me about people's reception to the work that you have been doing in this area. Have you had pushback from people? Have people been excited about this? Like, because I think it's kind of a mixed bag when you delve into negative history. So I'm curious how people have
It is.
received.
I've now spoken in Savannah, Georgia, Chicago, New York, a couple other places as well, because I'm connected. I'm part of the Conference of Presidents of major Italian organizations. So there's about 50 of us that I connect with, and they realize how important this story is. So this week we've seen it nationally put out there. One of the things that was great was our mayor. This 4 years ago, Latoya Cantrell, I was asked to go ask her to do an official apology because the mayor had a role in that in 1891.
As a city, really embrace the international fabric that is woven within this city that has made New Orleans truly who she is. So I am absolutely here today in my capacity as mayor of this city, speaking for the city of New Orleans in our entirety. I am here as this issue, in my opinion, is called for a formal apology. On March 14th, 1891, 11 Italians were made the victims of a lynch mob on the streets right here in the city of New Orleans. The city government at that time declined to seek justice for our people, and in fact, was implicated in the violence. That's why I'm here, and that's why I'm standing. This led to a rupture in Italian-American relations, and it was a serious, very serious injustice.
She was the first mayor out of 23, and this is in our video, that agreed to do that. So she did the apology. That went worldwide. So suddenly we saw people wanting to know more about this massacre. And to your point, and you've done a great piece on this and other pieces as well, the 5,000 was the size of the mob. And the mob was organized with the money that the city council gave this committee of 50. They ran ads trying to get people to hate Italians. The Italians were starting to be a voting bloc that could determine elections. So one group was losing power, and then consequently, they were trying to keep power by diminishing the Italians. The Italians were starting to work the docks, and they were taking jobs away. So you also had the dock workers upset with the Italians. They were willing to work for less money because they were poor. So you had wage problems going on, and they wanted these Italians gone. One Italian had the contract for many linear feet of the New Orleans dock. He was one of the guys that was killed. The guy that led the mob got his contract within 30 days.
I did not know that history.
His name is James Houston, and in my video, I try to talk about James Houston. He was the one that led the mob. He ran the full-page ad the day that they said, come meet at the Henry Clay statue, prepared for action. And they had all these Winchester rifles. They had picked their best sharpshooters that they knew. So when they went to the jail, the mob stood outside, and 60 guys with the Winchesters went inside to do the massacre. But they let some of the guys that had go. They only shot 11. There were 19 that was supposed to be tried. And one of the guys they went after was Massacre. Massacre had the dock contract.
Okay.
And
I didn't realize the dock contract. I didn't realize that part. It's just so damning. You know, you see the layers of the history, which is why you need to kind of dig deep for some of this stuff.
And James Houston, when I dug deep, I had to go through 6 books. 10 years earlier, he had actually killed 3 police officers on an election night because they were at the voting booths trying to stop his thugs from interfering with people voting. So he showed up and killed them and claimed self-defense and got off because his brother was a judge. So here you got a guy that's used to killing police officers. That's why I think he was involved in the killing of the chief. The chief had actually killed his main rival for the job 10 years earlier as well. We had the brothel. Okay. And it gets worse. We had the brothel situation going on in New Orleans. The chief owned part of a brothel, and he was shutting down other brothels that wouldn't pay him a fee. So you had maybe brothel owners that were mad at him. You had people that were friends of the guy that he killed that would have been moving up the ranks that were maybe mad at him. You have the doc. I mean, all these people. So we made it almost like a whodunit type of movie.
Generosity, kindness, faith. And I brought those values with me to the White House. And it's my absolute honor to serve as the first Italian-American First Lady. They breathe, they beat inside of us. In every artist and dreamer who pushes beyond the limits of our imaginations, in every advocate and lawyer fighting injustice, in every business owner who welcomes customers in with the warmth of home, in the children and the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren who put their shoulders back and find their courage, even when they're most afraid. And we keep those values alive, even as Sicilians were dragged from their cells and killed in New Orleans by an angry mob. Even when signs went up that said Italians need not apply.
And I think was so interesting, because you're saying this, I'm thinking corruption, right? But what I grew up with the Southern Italian stereotype is like, well, Italians are corrupt because of the mob. And, I never really knew a lot about it until I sat down with my dad, and he shared finding out that his grandfather, after coming to the United States, was approached and, thought about it and decided not to take that lifestyle path. But there, a lot of the articles, primary sources I've read, especially New Orleans, is Italians, Sicilians in particular. I'll say Sicilians in particular. They are so corrupt, like, and that rhetoric about the mob. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And what did you know about the mob as a little boy, or was it not something that you knew about until later?
And we have a connection here. There's a gentleman that was named Carlos Marsala, and he is reputed to have been involved in the mob. And then actually with the John F. Kennedy killing, and that fascinated the hell out of me. I actually went to Dallas and walked the grounds and went to the museum there about the JFK killing. You go to the mob museum in Las Vegas, and there's a whole story there about Marcello.
Wow.
The movie JFK was made about it. And growing up, I was 3 years old when JFK was assassinated. But there were still trials going on in New Orleans where they were trying to convict people for being involved in the conspiracy to kill JFK up until about 1968. So I saw the news about those trials. So I knew there was something going on here. And there was always that mystique about the mob. But also what I found out is the mob, and this goes back to Sicily, the mafia stands for Morta alla Francesca, Italy Angeli, death to France, Italy cries. So the mafia got started to get France out of Sicily in around 1226. And then you have this group, the Sicilians were needing to defend themselves. So when they came over here, I'm told that if a Sicilian girl got, nobody cared. Police didn't do anything, DA didn't do anything. So the Sicilian men started becoming their own police force. And that is sort of how the mob story gets going on, is that we were over here and nobody cared what happened to us. So the end result is you formed your own civic association to protect your own people. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of how it gets started. And now what I'm trying to do now is we've actually got 10 markers approved by the state of Louisiana telling of our contributions to New Orleans. And I can't get the city to let us put them up. So it's strange that the state has approved that they're accurate, but the city doesn't want our story told of some of the things that we did positive here. So I walk the streets, and recently I see that the guides saying this is where the mob got started. This is that, but they don't talk about the positive things that we did.
You're saying even now when people are taking like the walking tours?
This was only a month ago. I was in front of what's an area called Little Palermo in New Orleans, because there were so many people from Sicily there. Another little tidbit is Mother Cabrini was there. The Cabrini movie just came out. They won't let me put up a marker at Cabrini Park.
Wow.
The first plane to cross the Atlantic was a guy that left Rome, went to Africa, flew to Rio, up the Amazon, lands in New Orleans on the Mississippi River 2 months before Lindbergh. We can't put up a marker up for him. There's all these other things, civil rights that the Italians did. Pascal Gallegaro was a big judge that did a great job with civil rights. They won't let us put up that marker. Tivoli Circle was the circle they've renamed it. And that's after the town of Tivoli. And I asked if we could put up a marker there. All of these are state approved, and the city council says no. So the mafia image keeps growing because that's all the people are being taught in tour guide school.
So I was also really interested finding out about the relationship, the bittersweet relationship between these Sicilian immigrants and the freedmen, the African Americans in the South. And it wasn't always good, but it wasn't always bad either. It's a really unique dynamic. And one of the things a lot of people have told me is that they people who identify as Black from Louisiana and that area have taken DNA tests. They've had a lot of Southern Italian DNA showing up, which is surprising because normally in those situations, if you think you're, have had enslaved ancestors, you're going to probably have more like Northern European show up, and from that, and to me, I think that's probably hinting, and it was recent, the relationships that were happening in these areas that were not segregated.
Covering some unique stories that I find that most people don't know about, and your passion for them and your accuracy is amazing. I can always add a little bit of background because I've been able to.
Please do.
Dig deep. A good example is you told the story of the Tallulah lynching. What I would add to that story is the Sicilians came over here with no animosity to African Americans. And because they weren't part of the Civil War, they weren't part of everything that was going on. So they come over here, and in Tallulah, the deal was if you were at that store, fought a store, and I actually ran into one of the descendants last night at our St. Joseph parade.
Are you kidding me? That's
And I'm serious. I just met the guy, and he tells me that his ancestor was in the lynching, and I'm thinking New Orleans. And he says, oh, no, the Tallulah lynching.
Wow.
Yeah, and I actually did go up when they dedicated the markers in Vicksburg where they buried the people. We got that marker put up 4 years ago, and I interviewed some of the descendants that had flown in for that event. So that story is that family, if you were in line to buy, rice or whatever at their grocery store, you were in line. And white people would come in saying, well, I get to get in front of the black person. And the Italians would say, no, you don't. So there was an animosity to the Sicilians in Tallulah to that store. So besides the deal with the goat, you have the fact that they did not discriminate. Okay, there was no segregation going on in the Sicilian community. And I'm reading about Louis Prima because we're doing Louis Armstrong, a lot on music right now. Louis Armstrong was playing at places owned by Sicilians, the Matrangas, okay? And he lists and he talks greatly about how they cared for his mother and everything else. So as I read things, and the piece we're working on right now is on Cosmo Matassa, but this is 1940s. He's working with Dave Bartholomew, who's an African-American, and they're recording Fats Domino, Ray Charles, Little Richard, all at his studio. So the Sicilians did not have this segregation thing going on. They were violating it frequently, and it was maybe sometimes to their demise. So that was part of what was happening. Now, that's not saying it was 100% that way, but clearly in music, for sure, and in other places, there was no problems, because I look at the neighborhood we lived in Monroe, where Little Italy was. It's right next to the African-American neighborhood. And so there was this mixture of the cultures and it ended up in music and many other things.
That's beautiful. And I read this interview. I think it was maybe somebody's thesis paper for their PhD, but they were interviewing people in Shreveport. And they were asking people who were identified as Italian and Sicilian American about the desegregation experience. These are people who lived through that in schools. And one woman was just recollecting that to her, it was just like now she got to see her friends at school because she had grown up playing with the kids in the neighborhood who were considered Black, but they were in adjoining neighborhoods. And still, though, in this circumstance, the Sicilians were considered white enough to go to school, whatever that means, to the white school. But after desegregation, now she had her neighborhood friends with her in school. Was there something along this journey that just kind of shocked you? Because there's definitely been times where I'm researching and I come across something and I'm like, I need to tell all of my family right now what I just found.
When the Civil War started, it really wasn't about slavery, in my opinion. We had tariffs, we had some other issues going on. Lincoln doesn't say I'm ending slavery. Okay, the war gets started. He's losing. He sends an ambassador over to Italy because there was a guy named Garibaldi who had just unified Italy in 1861 in March. So now we're into October, okay? And they go find Garibaldi because he was this great general. He had lived in New York for a couple of years. They said, will you come back and be a general in the Union Army? And he says, if you make the war about ending slavery. So a year later, Lincoln decides to do that. And I feel like that's one strong thing that we have to think about is that Garibaldi was known as a freedom fighter. He fought in South America on this. He said, we're going to end slavery in America and then end it throughout the Western Hemisphere. That was his offer to Lincoln, that he would take the position if Lincoln would do that. The ambassador said, we're not in a position to do that. So Garibaldi refuses the offer of Lincoln to do that. Another little tidbit there, as I found out, is the guy under Garibaldi was from New Orleans during those Italian wars, and his name was Wheat. So Wheat had fought in the Mexican-American War here. He's fighting as a mercenary under Garibaldi. They've got 12,000 Sicilian POWs now in 1861. And he says, hey, there's a war breaking out in America. I want to go back. I'm going back. Can I take some of these POWs? And Garibaldi says, yeah, we won't have to feed them. We won't have to worry about them guerrilla tactics. We don't know what to do with them. Get them out of here. So 1,200 Sicilians leave Naples and come to New Orleans. And that's the beginning of the Tiger Unit of the Confederacy that became the LSU Tigers.
Wow, it's so wild. I did not know that. I do now, when you were talking about Garibaldi writing that letter back to Lincoln, I remember reading that a long time ago. That is something that I feel like needs to be in every American history book when we're talking about this stuff. And I know not everything can fit in but has made me sad that, growing up, my experience of identifying with my dad's Italian heritage is I didn't know any of these people to be proud of. I didn't know that there was all of these heroes. You know what I mean? You have Columbus, who's kind of become more than a man, is standing in for all of the people that we should know that we don't know about.
There's 15 books on Columbus back behind me right now. And I will add this because I know this is a hot topic, and this is some of the things I'm working on. Columbus, in my opinion, is he an explorer or is he a conquistador? And the more that I'm finding out, I'm hoping to go to Genoa in May and study him there a little bit more, is that he's from Genoa. He doesn't get the Italians to fund his trip. He tried to get the British to do it. So he ends up getting the Spanish to do it. Well, the Spanish had just finished the war of the Reconquista War, taking Spain back from the Muslims. And they had all these soldiers. So on his second voyage, they send a lot of these soldiers with him. He's really trying to get to India to try to take back Jerusalem, and hoping that the people in India will help him take back Jerusalem. So he's looking for the passageway to get there. He's really not worried about trying to do anything and conquer. The conquistadors come over, Cortez and all these other people, and he is being blamed for those actions. He was really out at sea the 12 years from his first voyage to his fourth voyage. He actually had a 1 year where he was stranded in Jamaica. The ships fell apart, and he was on an island for a year. The other people, we're looking to do a story that explains all these other people that were really the Spanish governors during his period that he's being blamed for. Because I think there's so much to talk about it with Columbus. We have 6,000 things in America named after him. And he would be like the Columbia space shuttle. Columbia was the name of the Apollo rocket that landed on the moon, the command module. Columbia was a ship that's at Disneyland that I'm going to go to next month to ride. There's a ride in Disneyland, the Columbia ship, that came right after we became a country. So, Columbia as a goddess before the Statue of Liberty was seen as what America was aspiring to be. And then this is something that's pretty neat that I did find. I think you'll find. So one of the things we have right now is to educate on the Columbus and Columbus Day reasons, and hopefully that we don't see that day get lost, and we're working now. The Native Americans, you talked about the Dakota tribe, they have actually, or nation, excuse me, they have partnered with us to form the Native American Guardians Association. They want to see Columbus kept. They do not have an issue with Columbus. And we just formed that about a month ago. Wow. I was on a Zoom call with them. It was 10 of us from the Italian group, and there's 3 of them. They also are offended by calling it Indigenous People Day. They're Native Americans. They don't consider themselves Indigenous people, and they feel like they're losing their identity. They have a thing called 7 generations. Yeah. They want to make sure that the 7th generation knows who they were, which is a beautiful thing.
It is beautiful. I love that. 'Cause it's the process of you're looking back enough to know what to pass on to the next generation. What do you think you want the next generation of, I would say, all Americans to know about the Italian experience here in the United States?
I would say, we part of what we've been talking about is engineering. I'm an engineer. So there was Marconi and Marucci, who invented, wireless communications and all, that we want to be known more for just pasta and wine. We did a lot of engineering work in America. We did a lot with government work as well. We've had some great work with civil rights, like Garibaldi, saying, hey, this is wrong, the slavery you guys have. So we have contributed so many ways to America that we need to let that be known. And we would also hope to inspire more Italy trade because of the technology that Italy has. It's much more than just going over there to party and drink and eat. There's telemedicine and other things the Italians are doing. Clean energy are really earth-shattering. So we're trying to tell that story that we brought a lot. And actually, Ben Franklin used a lot of, Filangieri. He was a guy that, you're nodding your head, you know what I'm talking about. He wrote a lot about how government should be equal rights, free speech, trial by jury. That was 17th century. So the influence of Italians in creating America's vision, which Columbia was, of what we're going to be of this country that's welcoming, and we aspire to great things and humanity. That's who I think we have to tell a story of what our culture is about.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe to Danielle's YouTube channel, NYTN, And also, subscribe to Awe News to see our episodes on Louisiana culture.